Now, I was pretty much to the point where I believed the medical evidence that he was shot from the back. There's a lot of good evidence for that. But it seems to me if he was shot from the back of his head would be coming off first, not this reaction, this spray from the front. So I began to think to myself, well, maybe I've been too quick to judge on whether he was actually shot from the front. So that led us to the Mary Moorman photograph. Now, Mary Moorman took this picture, and it's one of the few that's actually survived. Luckily, her picture was popularized enough that it very quickly got out into the media, and they weren't able to get rid of it. But in that picture, she took a picture of the grassy knoll area. This is what's called the picket fence. This is a sort of a concrete berm in front of it. And in this program, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, which I wanted to show you, but we're short on time, two guys who were conspiracy, not theorists, but conspiracy suspectors, started to look at this area of the picture right here. And what they found was, as they enhanced it and worked on it, the image of somebody, apparently, up on the grassy knoll. And this is a cut from The Men Who Killed Kennedy. You see what looks like maybe a muzzle blast. There's what could be a badge of a policeman's uniform. Over here, he's got an arm emblem, which we'll show you in a little bit. And maybe, there's a guy positioned like that. There's a couple of ears, prominent eyebrows, dark, interesting hair. So it looks like there's somebody standing up there actually shooting at the president. Next to that is a very strange figure, outline of a guy who, it's really kind of hard to make out what that is from the initial images. This is a colorized enhancement of the two figures. This is a guy in some sort of, well, maybe army uniform. This is a guy in a police. You can see the police emblem there, and it exactly matches the policeman's uniform for Dallas. Now, they also showed on there the story of a man named Gordon Arnold. Now, Gordon Arnold comes on this program, and he's interviewed live. He's interviewed on film, and what he said was, he was there for the day. He was there in Dallas that day. He'd just gotten out of the Army, I think it was basic training. He was wearing his overseas cap, which is a pointed cap, kind of a pointed cap. He had his mom's camera, and he was filming. And he went to the grassy knoll and stood right next to that, right next to a tree back there behind the concrete. And as he was doing so, a shot rang out, whizzed right past his ear. He knew immediately what it was. He leaned over, fell to the ground. A guy wearing a Dallas policeman's uniform with no hat on, and you notice this guy has no hat on, with a rifle, pointed the rifle at him, demanded his film, kicked him, took his film, and that was the last he ever saw of it. And he never told anybody the story until the late 1980s. Now, this is a third enhancement, also colorized, of another figure, a guy in a railroad outfit. Now, the interesting thing about Gordon Arnold's story is all of this stuff, none of this stuff about this picture was known. This work was all done in the 1990s. Gordon Arnold first told the story in late 1989, I think it was. So all of these details, camera in front of the face, looks to me like you got an arm here holding something up in front of your face, could be a camera. He's got, look at the overseas caps, there's a little emblem on them, he has that, there's some stuff on the belt of the uniform, it's a camouflage uniform. Literally, he's standing slightly in front of this guy, if this guy actually exists. And it's a very convincing interview. When they finally show Gordon Arnold this picture of what they've done, he literally freaks out because he says to himself, I could be the only guy who saw the man who shot the president. Now, maybe later if we have time, I'll actually show you the video of the interview and the story. But what really, really weirded me out when I started to dig into it is that some people on the web had made a comparison between this guy, the badge man figure as he came to be known, and a Dallas police officer named J.D. Tippit. If you look at the picture, you see prominent dark eyebrows. I see sort of a strange looking peak there of the way his male pattern baldness is formed. And he looks to me like in pictures I've seen that he's got the same pattern on both sides of his head. So even though this is the left side of his face and this is the right, it could be that's pretty dark there. But the ears are the right size, the right position, they're prominent. It looks to me, I think, eerily, creepily like J.D. Tippit. Here's another sort of one where we flipped over to again show you how it would compare. J.D. Tippit was killed in the line of duty a few hours after the assassination. The story is that Lee Harvey Oswald was walking down the street. Officer Tippit pulled up in his car, and Oswald shot him 5 or 6 times. There's some dispute and controversy about those facts and those circumstances, and I really don't mean to impugn the integrity of a Dallas police officer. All I'm saying is I am really, really creeped out by the resemblance between this guy here, who I believe is a real figure on that grassy knoll, and the pictures I've seen of Officer Tippit. So here's Tippit as he appeared around the time of his death, about 40 years old, and Lee Harvey Oswald. I don't know if J.D. Tippit was on the grassy knoll shooting at the president. I know that there was somebody there in a Dallas policeman's uniform that looked pretty much exactly like Gordon Arnold described him without the hat on. And the only other thing I know is that, 2 or 3 hours after the assassination, J.D. Tippit ran into Lee Harvey Oswald, and he was dead. And the next day, Lee Harvey Oswald ran into Jack Ruby, and he was dead. So if Tippit was on the grassy knoll and Oswald was in the school book depository, the bottom line is they were down to a single point failure, which was Jack Ruby. And he really never talked, and whoever believed Jack Ruby. Not really anybody. He had zero credibility. So I don't know if this is all, necessarily connected, but I think there's enough doubt looking at those pictures to say to myself that, yeah, I think there's a reasonable chance, given the acoustic evidence and given the visual evidence, that Lee Harvey Oswald and somebody else were firing at the president at the same time. So that creates a conspiracy. Now, I want to say one other thing quickly about Gordon Arnold before we go on. There's lots of stuff on the web claiming that there's all these discrepancies in his stories. And he told the story later. He was an elderly man at the time. He was in his late 60s. He wasn't, which is not totally elderly, but he was in his late 60s at the time. He was not totally healthy during some of his interviews. And I've never actually seen any other interviews with Gordon Arnold. All I've seen is transcripts on the internet of supposed interviews of Gordon Arnold where there are discrepancies. One guy, I think it was Gerald Posner, who wrote Case Closed, which was a book that at one time had me convinced there was only one assassin, and it was Lee Harvey Oswald, wrote that, gosh, you really can't believe Gordon Arnold's story, because one time he said that the man had dirty fingernails, and the other time he said the man had dirty hands. To me, I think that's nitpicking a little bit. So if you have 2 shooters, and I think there's at least a distinct possibility that you have visual and acoustic evidence of 2 shooters, then you have to have a conspiracy. So who would the conspiracy involve? This is Congressman Albert Thomas. This is the night before the assassination in Houston. President Kennedy flew to Houston for a special testimonial dinner to Congressman Thomas. Thomas was famous for his bow ties. He was also the guy who controlled in the House all the funding for NASA. So he had a distinct NASA connection. He was in a presidential motorcade. He was in a car that was behind President Kennedy when he was shot. He went with him to Parkland Hospital. He waited outside the emergency room until it was announced that Kennedy was dead. After that, one other thing. These guys are the so-called 3 tramps who were arrested in Dealey Plaza. They were 3 guys. They were arrested. They were marched to the nearby a police station, and eventually they were released, and nobody really ever found out what happened to them. But recently, a man named St. John Hunt, who was the son of E. Howard Hunt, who was a figure in a CIA guy and a figure in the Watergate conspiracy, has come out and said that not only did his dad tell him at one time that there was a conspiracy that the CIA was involved in killing President Kennedy, that the top guy in it was LBJ, and that the Masons were the ones who perpetrated the whole thing. He also has looked at this picture and a couple of others, and he says categorically that is his dad.